What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be covering more of the advanced minimap logic in our first-person shooter tutorial series game. So in today's episode, what we're going to be covering is adding a player icon in the correct spot with the correct rotation in the minimap, as well as making the minimap into a circular texture for the UI. That way it can look more like a radar, which is what we're going for in this series. So we have all of our mechanics coming together to start working as a team, and we'll be able to also customize some of our minimap appearance and player icon appearance after today's episode as well. Alright, so before we get started, if you'd like to get caught up in the series, we are on episode 37 of the first person shooter tutorial, and if you click this icon in the top right corner right here, it'll bring you to the playlist, which has all the episodes that we used to get to this point for the entire series, not just the minimap, but everything that we've done. Alternatively, I can also link you right here, which is to the first episode of the minimap logic. This is to the basic minimap where we're still using a camera, but we do use some of that logic here to determine how our advanced minimap is set up. So even though the methods have changed, could be worth watching it over if you'd like to get caught up to where we are today. Otherwise, guys, let's go ahead and get started. First things first, we're going to direct to our minimap widget that we made in part 1. So I have a widget just literally called minimap, and it had a minimap image on it. To start off, we are going to add an overlay over this image. You could actually just add an image on top of this minimap image and get a workable result. But the overlay is really useful because we can add a widget from a different point, and we can actually spawn it directly on top of the overlay. So it's basically like having layers or a Z order within the widget. So we can have this overlay that we can put things on. We're going to put all of our icons on it. So if you've been following the series, you'll most likely just have the widget here, and then you'll have this image, and you won't have an overlay. So we're going to add that overlay. Now, if you search for overlay, you could add it here, but when you try and add it, it's actually going to be like widget can't have children, and then if you go over your minimap image and try and make it as a child, it's going to say widget can't have children. You'd have to actually delete your minimap image or add another container and add the overlay. It's much easier, in my opinion, just right-click on the image, wrap with, and click Overlay. Okay, once you do, you'll get this guy right here, which is an overlay. You're going to want to go ahead and call him something because we are going to need to use him. So I called a minimap overlay and made sure that he was a variable. Alright, now with that done, you'll notice that your image is probably blank right now, or at least very small, like that. He's there, just tiny. We need to make him bigger. To do this, you can just fill the container he's in. The overlay automatically, since it's the only container in this widget, is going to take up the entire space of the widget. And so, if you were to fill the overlay, you would fill the widget. So if you click on your minimap image, you can go ahead and change the alignment to full horizontal, full vertical, and you'll fill the entire widget. Now yours is going to be a square, not a circle, but it's the same idea. You're going to see this should be filled now, and this should be what your minimap widget looks like. Now we're going to have to do some stuff in this widget to spawn our player icon and get it in the right spot, but we can't do that yet because we don't have our player icon. Alright, so let's step back for a second. And let's make a new widget. We're going to make our player icon widget. So we can add user interface widget blueprint. I called mine player icon widget. And we can click into this guy once you make him. Now for this guy, all I've done is add an image, just like before. You can find it under common, or you can search for it. Just drag it onto the screen. And I called it player icon image. Simple enough, nothing really confusing here. Now, what's going to happen is this is what's going to be added to the overlay. So in this case, we're using the player icon. That is the character that the player is controlling that is going to represent who they are on the minimap. So I'm the white arrow here. If I turn, it turns with me. If I move, it moves with me. Okay? So that's what we're making. Now, again, I know we just transferred to UE5 in the series, so some of our other widgets, we had like a canvas panel, and we organized it to where if it was going to be on the HUD, it would be, you know, this section of the HUD, we like spaced it out. This is a little bit different. Now we can just go into our widget and have this image, and this will appear at the size we tell it to appear at. So in this case, I have this image that I'm setting to 48 by 48, and then I'm just applying it to the overlay on the minimap. So if I were to change this, I could say make it 32 by 32. See, it's smaller. I could make it 24 by 24. And it's getting tinier, right? I like 48 by 48. I thought that looked pretty good. But you really have as many options as you want, whatever you want. And so it's probably a little bit big, but it looks, I think it looks good for showing it off and testing it out as well. So essentially, you're going to add an image to the widget, name it. I called it player icon image, like I said, and then I made sure that it was a variable. I'm going to make sure that I go to my image under brush and change the image to the cursor. I called it Minimap cursor. I added this during the basic Minimap episode. But essentially this is an image I made and I imported in. It's literally that simple. I don't have to use a sprite. I can use the actual texture that I imported in. So this is essentially just a PNG that was imported and we're good to go. Nothing else required. So that's simple enough. Then you can change the image size here. Now it's up to you. You can have an actual size that you use, or you can just experiment with the image size here and see what you like. Okay. I didn't change anything else in here, so we're golden. And now this is our player icon. And now we have a widget for it that we can actually use to spawn on the overlay. You know, basically attach it to the minimap. And we're going to rotate this to work with the character's orientation. So as they rotate, this rotates. We can go ahead and make it rotate now. Let's get that set up so that when we add it to our minimap, it's all good to go. So we go into the graph of our player icon widget. There's not much we have to do. When you first come in here, you'll have pre-construct, construct, and tick. You can get rid of the other ones like I have, or keep them, doesn't matter. But the one you need to use right now is tick, because this needs to update every time the player updates. And what we want to do is grab the owning player of this widget, and then we want to get their rotation and do something called set render transform angle. Okay, so set render transform angle is what's going to actually rotate this. I know it might sound a little bit weird, but if you click on the image here, you have this render transform, and the angle is what actually rotates it around. Okay, so by default it's 0, but as that rotates, or as that changes, it will rotate this image. So, first things first, let's get owning player pawn. And we set the owner to this in the previous episode. So when we spawned the advanced minimap on the HUD, we set the owner to the owner of the HUD, which was the character. And so since the HUD owns the minimap, and the minimap will have the overlay that the player icon widget is on, then the owner of this player icon will be this character. So we want to make sure that it is this character, and we can figure that out by casting to our FPS tutorial character, which is my base character. If I go to the code, that's my base character. Okay, so that's what I've done right here. Now, assuming this cast succeeds, we can actually bind our logic, essentially. So, from here, I just drag off the cast and get actor rotation. Oops, can't spell today. And then we are going to split the struct pin. Okay, you notice that? So we had a rotator here as a return value, but we only want the Z because that's what happens to rotate this the correct direction. So if we split the struct pin, we can get access to just the Z. And then with the Z, we can then set render transform angle on the player icon image. As long as you made this image a variable right here, you can drag it into the graph, get it, and then set render transform angle. Angle we're passing in is the return value Z, the yaw. Now you can try it with the other ones if you'd like and see what it does. So say I pass in the Y. You're going to notice that it's not going to rotate at all because I can't rotate my character on the Y axis with my current controls. Now if we do it with the X, you'll see that nothing happens here either. So you know that those are wrong. So if you have trouble with the Z for any reason, if your world is flipped or you have worlds that change, you know, they're at different orientations than what the default is, you'll have to just adjust that to work with it. But the Z rotation is pretty much always going to be the standard case here. Alright, so once we hook that back up, just again, you can see that it actually rotates as it should when the player is rotating, when the character is rotating. Okay, and now with that, we need to make sure that we add this icon to our Minimap widget. So we can go into our graph, and we had event tick from the previous episode. We're not going to be touching that today. Something we did not have, but we're going to be adding, is all of event construct here. So in the previous episode, I actually had gotten rid of event construct and just had event tick, similar to the player icon widget, but it's super easy to get back. You can just type anywhere for event construct. That's the one we want. Once you click that, you'll get this node right here. And what we need to do is now determine where we want this icon to appear on the minimap. Okay, now typically the player icon goes right in the center of the minimap. The minimap essentially works around that player icon, right? The player icon's here. As this moves, it stays in place because the minimap is moving and seeing different parts of the texture. Okay, so we need to center it in the minimap. That's essentially what we're working with. Now, what we can do here is we can get our owning player. Remember I said that the player, the main character, was owning the widget, and so now it's owning the minimap, and that's true. So we can use our owning player and set that as the owner of the new widget that we create as well. So we can create widget, pass in the owning player, and then player icon widget that we made is the widget that we're going to create here. Okay, so that's how I did this. Now what we have to do is use our overlay, which is why this has to be a variable. Okay, minimap overlay, this has to be a variable. If it's not a variable, you won't be able to access it in the graph. Okay, so we're going to use our overlay here. We're going to drag it onto the screen. We're going to get it, and we're going to type add child to overlay. Whoops. The minimap is the overlay that we're adding things to, and the thing we're adding is the content. So we need to grab the player icon widget that we created and drag the return value directly into the content. Okay. Lastly, using the return value of add child to overlay, this return value is the player icon in relation to the overlay. Alright, so it's basically, it's an overlay slot object references the actual object type, but essentially what it is that spot that this icon was added to on the overlay, what are the settings for it? That's what we're looking at. So we drag off the return value and do two things: set horizontal alignment and set vertical alignment. Right here. And set vertical alignment right here. Now for each of these, when they come in, they're going to be fill. If you do that, you're going to see that it's going to look like this. Okay, because it's going to fill the horizontal and vertical alignment. And that's not what we want. Or maybe you do, but that's not what we want right now. So you can do center on both of them just to get in the center. You know, use whatever ones you need for the effect that you want, but center will get it right in the middle of the minimap. Okay? And last thing we want to do for today is make the minimap into a circle on the UI. If you'd like to do that, you don't have to. To do this, I'm going to go back to my material for it, which I called m_minimap. Okay, and so we had all this going on for the first tutorial on the advanced minimap with the actually getting the spot in the texture and the zoom and all that stuff, and that's all good. I've added something super tiny here, and this is a standard method for creating a circle on a UI material. What it was before, it was just set to opaque. If we want to add other things to it, like put something over top of it, then we can add something called mask, and it will have an opacity mask. Well, there's something in Unreal called a sphere mask. It's a basic function that we can actually call here to pass in. As long as we give it parameters, it will create a sphere for us, or really a circle for us, in this case, since it is a user interface, a 2D widget. And thus, we'll be able to pass that value in, and it will go essentially over top of this object right here. And then you can go ahead and edit it from there to make it appear how you want. Okay, so what we have to do mainly is change the blend mode from opaque to mask when you click on the actual material here. It also works if you're not clicked on any node, but if you click on some other nodes, it can change it. So either click on the material node or just don't click on anything specific in the graph. You can change the blend mode, like I said. You can still leave it user interface, just change opaque to mask. That way we can add a mask to it. Before you have this, it will look like this, where the mask is actually grayed out and you can't use it. That's why we need that mask. Okay, now, like I said, this is super simple. There's a sphere mask that we can just call here, and you can pass it in. Problem is, you need to pass it an A and a B, and then you also need to give it a radius and a hardness. The hardness you don't have to change, and the radius you don't necessarily have to change, but if you don't change it, you won't see the true effects of the sphere mask. We'll get into that in a second. So, once we have the sphere mask in here, the reason we need to plug things into it is because if we just applied some random sphere, or in this case again just a circle, then it would just cover the mask would just cover our image here, our actual material. We don't want that. We need to determine what it is that we want to display. So we can just grab our texture coordinate to know that we want to display something of that value, as opposed to just applying a standard color. Let me show you what happens just so you can see. Say we applied like 0, 0. Okay. You're not going to see anything. Alright. So you need the texture coordinate so you know what we're displaying. Because if you just give it some random constant value, it's not going to have anything to display. Just going to cover the entire thing. Okay. So we use our texture coordinate to show what we're displaying. And then the B is going to be where we have to display from. All right, and we want to make sure that we're displaying from the center of the image, which in the case of UV's texture coordinates is 0 to 1, 0 to 1, right? So with that, half and half is 0.5 and 0.5. So texture coordinate for the A. For the B, it is a constant to vector right here. Either of these works. And then you're going to put in, you're going to see 0, 0 is just taking that one coordinate because the radius is 0.5. All right. But if we make these 0.5, you're going to see it's going to fill out over time. And there you go. That's how it comes to life. So you plug in your 0.5, 0.5. And when you click on the sphere mask, you can give it a scalar value. You have to plug these two in. The radius you can just determine here, but you can also drag out, give it a scalar parameter. Radius. We'll make it specific for this. Radius of mask. And we can give it a default value of 0.5. Something like that. You could do the same for the hardness. But again, since these are grayed out, you can see, these aren't, it's not like you can't use them, okay? These are like optional parameters. They have default values you can override on this node, but the A and the B you have to pass in. Okay, then once you pass in a radius, it needs to be 0.5 or less, really, because if it's not going to get the full circle effect. It's not going to go half. So watch this. Say I make it 0.8. It's a square. Say I make it, I think, like 0.65. Yeah, so you start to have these rounded edges, but it's not actually reaching the part of the mask. It's just literally, it's going farther out than the 0.5 is, and so it's not able to cut it off here. All right, what I mean by this, let's say I change these constants to 0.65 and 0.65. So you are getting a circle. Now, it's not the right spot because 0.5 is not half of the X and the Y. So it's offset. We're not in the center of this texture. But you can see we do have rounded edges because the radius is able to reach the circular part, the end of the sphere. And it's able to make a rounded edge. So these kind of have to line up. And again, the reason we do 0.5 and 0.5 is to get the texture centered here. But if you don't have the proper values in this radius, you're not going to get an actual circle. Now you can go under it as well, and it will just decrease how far you go from the center. So the smaller this is, if I make this 0.1, it's going to be a super small circle. 0.5 is the highest value we can have and still have a circle. Once you do that, you have your radar to be set up, and you have a circle on your minimap. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for today, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this helped you make your advanced minimap a little bit better for your FPS tutorial or FPS project. If you did enjoy, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys so much for all the love and support. I am so incredibly grateful. Thank you for getting me excited to work on these videos week after week. They're such a blast to work on, and I'm glad you guys are learning and enjoying them as well. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. Be happy to assist you and get you all set up and ready to go on to the next one. But anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.